Planning and Development, or CPD. My name is John McGaugh. I work at the National Center on Family Homelessness, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of CPD, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Today's webinar is eCon Planning Suite, CPD Maps, and the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS for state grantees. Before we begin, I'd like to make some logistical announcements. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour, and the webinar is being recorded. The recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted next week on the OneCPD Resource Exchange website. Just click on Learning Center, then ConPlan Training. Now, as an attendee of this webinar, your microphone will be automatically muted. Please listen to the presentation through your phone for best results. The call-in information has been sent to you and is also displayed on the screen now and listed in the upper left-hand corner of your meeting room screen under Audio Instructions. Another option is to use your computer speakers. This requires that you turn on and turn up the speakers on your computer. And due to the large number of attendees, there may be a slight delay in the advancement of the slides. This webinar will include live website demonstrations. To enlarge these demonstrations, simply click the button Full Screen in the upper right-hand corner of the demonstration window. Clicking Full Screen again will resize or diminish the window. If you experience any other technical difficulties, please let us know by using the Q&A box on your screen. And you can also submit content-related questions using the same Q&A box, and we will try to address them during the presentation. Immediately following the webinar, you will be directed to a survey, and participants are strongly encouraged to respond to the evaluation. These responses will be used as HUD plans future webinars, and we greatly appreciate your answers to those. Today's webinar will be presented by Caitlin Ott, Assistant Project Manager, and Meg Barclay, Project Manager, both of the CPD office. And now I'd like to pass this over to Caitlin to begin the presentation. Caitlin?
Thanks, John. And thanks everyone for joining us today for the webinar on CPD Maps and the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS for states. The purpose of today's presentation is to introduce and demonstrate some of the features of these tools that were designed specifically to meet the unique needs of state grantees. As you'll see in today's webinar, the Consolidated Plan was meant to be a result of priority setting based on community participation and an integrated assessment of need, market conditions, and available resources. However, because of limited information about need and market conditions and lack of useful tools, many grantees' planning processes have often focused on data gathering and budgeting. The eCon Planning Suite is designed to support the creation of need-driven and place-based plans. By using the tools in the eCon Planning Suite, state grantees will be able to focus on analyzing data rather than on gathering it, and using this data and the planning template to set priorities, leverage resources, and develop effective strategies that improve communities. This is the webinar, or this is the agenda for today's webinar. I just want to mention before we get started that you should send your questions throughout the presentation in the question box, but we will be compiling and answering those questions aloud at the end of the webinar for everyone's benefit, or if we have pauses during the demonstration, we may answer questions at those times. But technical questions, as John mentioned, with sound or other issues with the webinar software will be handled directly in the question box. So on the webinar today, we'll cover the background of the eCon Planning Suite, the purpose and design of the template in IDIS, and then do a demonstration of the useful features of the template for state grantees. I'll go on to discuss the data in the GIS database and the features of CPD Maps, and then show you a demonstration of the useful features of CPD Maps for state grantees. I'll cover some upcoming improvements for states in a couple months, and the implementation timeline and key resources that you'll want to remember. So as I mentioned, the eCon Planning Suite was designed to support need-driven, place-based planning, and it's comprised of 3 components. And if you've watched any of our previous webinars or seen any of our other presentations live, this slide will look familiar to you. But first, HUD has assembled an expanded planning database, which speaks to all uses of the Consolidated Plan grant funds, and made that data easier to understand and manage through CPD Maps, a user-friendly website that makes data accessible to grantees and the public alike. CPD Maps provides several tools to analyze, compare, and display conditions throughout the jurisdiction or state to support place-based decision-making. And data can be displayed at various geographies, such as tracts, or even counties and states, which helps states, too, compare regions or areas within a state as part of a needs and market assessment. And then the third component, fed by both of these two previous components, is the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS Online. We designed this standard electronic submission template for the Consolidated Plan, Action Plan, and CAPER, or PER, so that grantees can complete them themselves without the assistance necessarily of consultants. And the template provides greater efficiency by being incorporated into IDIS, which is the Grant Management and Reporting System, so that goals in the plans can be connected to activities and outcomes that you are reporting throughout the program year in IDIS. So as you all know, I'm sure, the Consolidated Plan was established by regulation in 1995 to create efficiencies for grantees by establishing common planning requirements across the 4 block grants. At the beginning of the process of developing this eCon planning suite, we at HUD did a lot of work to better understand these regulations and determined that they actually describe a pretty good planning process, and we weren't really in need of a rule change. So the graphic on this slide depicts that structure of the regulations, which envisions a process where a multi-year strategy and subsequent annual action plans are driven equally by public participation, a needs assessment, and a market analysis. Through our work with the regulations, though, we did find that the implementation of the Consolidated Plan did not accomplish everything it envisioned. For example, HUD never prescribed a standard form, which is allowed by the regulations, which means that grantees are often left to guess when they've met requirements, and ConPlans often then focus on lengthy narratives because the expectations aren't clear. In practice, ConPlans don't live up to that data-driven planning process laid out in the regulations either, because technology has been inadequate, data hasn't been accessible, and there's been a lack of explicit connection between planning and performance. And as you can see from this purple and blue band that runs along the top of the picture, as a paper process, the planning and the reporting in purple are divorced from the work that grantees are doing throughout the program year in IDIS, which we have represented there in the blue, throughout the program year when you're drawing down funds and reporting accomplishments. So to begin, we'll just focus a little bit on the redesigned template in IDIS. And this slide shows the changes that we've made from the current template that many grantees use called the Consolidated Planning Management Process, CPMP template, which was never required, but like I said, many grantees do use it. And as you can see there on the left, the old template walked grantees through a process of discussing their needs, market, priorities, and goals separately for each of the grant programs, which creates several plans sort of within a plan. Whereas this redesigned template that we've created in IDIS inverts that structure to create one needs section that covers housing, homelessness, special needs, and community development, and then one market inventory analysis that does the same, one integrated set of priorities, and one set of goals, which cuts down on repetition, but also facilitates priority setting based on an assessment of relative need. This new template removes a lot of the guesswork by providing a standard format for all grantees. And so HUD's expectations are clear in terms of content and when the regulations are met, and all of this is based on what data is available. Also, the integrated structure will promote collaboration across agencies that administer these funds. So housing and community development agencies will need to work together to complete the template, as opposed to completing the sections of the plan separately and then just combining them to send them off to HUD. So it really is one overall strategy. So we think that the design of the ConPlan template will be a more useful planning tool for all grantees because the integration of data and maps from CPD Maps allows for targeting based on an analysis of place-based data both community-wide and by specific target areas such as regions within a state. Also, the pre-populated data in the template in IDIS is based on service areas for each grant. So for example, housing needs and housing market data is provided statewide because states can use their home funds within entitlement communities. So really they should be examining the needs through the entire state. While economic development data, which speaks to the uses of CDBG, is populated based on the CDBG non-entitlement service area only. I mentioned already that the structure of the template in IDIS facilitates collaboration among state grantees, but also the template facilitates consultation and collaboration with state partners and other planning processes within the state. And the mapping tool allows for more meaningful citizen participation by making needs and market data publicly available for that public hearing and public consultation process. The template also provides a framework for incorporating the leveraging of public and private funds and aligning priorities. It's based on also the needs of each type of grantee. So for example, the state template incorporates the method of distribution in the annual action plan, and we'll take a look at that today. So the first demonstration that we're going to get into is the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS, and I'm going to cover the useful features of the ConPlan template for states, including the default data that's pre-populated in the tables throughout the plan, and then how you would alter that data, adding your own local or state sources, how to customize the plan with maps, images, additional text, and data tables. We'll take a look at the structure of the strategic plan and annual action plan, and specifically how some of the specific screens connect to each other and build upon each other. So data entered in one screen will show up on later screens. And then we'll take a look at the method of distribution in the annual action plan, which of course is specific to states. So now we're going to move over to IDIS. And right now, I'm going to use Pennsylvania as just sort of our demonstration grantee because I just happen to have access to Pennsylvania in the UAT environment. Before I get started, you may want to switch to full screen view using the button in the top right corner of the webinar. But again, to ask a question, you're going to need to click that button and exit the full screen view. So first, to find the Consolidated Plan module, of course, you're going to go in the Plans, Projects, and Activities, which we're already in here, and you'll see the Consolidated Plan, Annual Action Plan, and CAPER modules over here on the left if you have access. We're going to start by adding a plan, but I've also created a plan and input some data already for the purposes of the demonstration, so I'll end up showing you how to search as well when we go to that. To add a plan, you click Add, and you're taken to screen 8025, which is the administration screen. And then you enter that general information about the plan, the start year, the end year, give it a title, and then a version. You want to make this unique. Of course, this is not an amendment, it's a full plan, so we don't have to do anything there. You can see that all of the programs are included because Pennsylvania receives all of the block grants. And then the Consolidated Plan is 4, identifies whether this is a grantee plan, and that's the same. It is a grantee plan for states. It's also a grantee plan for entitlements. The only difference is if it wouldn't be a grantee plan would be if you were a consortia or a regional plan, which is a group of multiple grantees. So we're going to select grantee. Moving down, you can see here that there's a couple alternate or local data sources. This is because I've already added alternate data to the other plan that I created, so they're saved in the system. So this is one example of how when you enter data in the system, you won't have to enter it multiple times. Normally, when you add your first plan, you won't see anything here until you add alternate data later in the plan. And then next, I just want to show you how you should select public housing agencies. This is going to seem tedious the first time, but once you've submitted a plan, you won't have to do this. The next time you submit a plan in the system, this information will be there. It's saved in the system. But it's important to do this at the time you set up the plan because choosing public housing agencies will tell the system what data to pull in order to populate all the data tables for the public housing needs screens. For a state, you don't really need to put any search criteria in because we're already bounded by the state. So I'll just hit search, and all of the public housing agencies in Pennsylvania will appear. And so I'm going to want to check all of them. So like I said, it takes a minute or two at first, but it's really, it doesn't take that long, and given that you don't have to go out and gather the data yourself, this is a pretty easy alternative. For the purpose of demonstration, I don't need to click all of them, but you can see there's a lengthy list, but you select them once, hit select, and then you can see down here they've all been added, and the system will automatically aggregate all that data. So I just want to note also that while state consolidated plan regulations don't include public housing needs assessment or market analysis requirements, there is a requirement for states to discuss the needs of public housing residents in the strategic plan section. So because state housing finance agencies often don't work directly with local PHAs and wouldn't have that data, this is the way that we're providing data to you to support that discussion of activities to address the needs of public housing residents, even though that requirement doesn't specifically show up in the needs assessment. We've included data in the needs assessment to support that later requirement. And then once you have everything the way you want it to add a plan, you just click Save. And you'll be taken to the main menu for the Consolidated Plan and First Year Annual Action Plan. And here it is. At this point, I'm going to go and open a plan that I've already created and entered some data in so that we can save some time on data entry. I'm going to do that by over in the ConPlan module, selecting Search. And I only have 2 in here, so I don't have to enter any criteria. And then here's the plan we've just created, the test plan, and the plan I created earlier is the demonstration plan. So I'm going to select Edit so that I can enter some information as we go through. Again, here we are in the main menu, and as I scroll down, you can see some of the features I was mentioning before, how the needs assessment is all together for all the different types of grant programs or types of needs. There's one market analysis section for housing, for homelessness, for special needs, for non-housing community development assets. And then as we move down to the strategic plan, there's one screen for priority needs, and there's one screen for goals. So really, state agencies are going to need to work together to develop an integrated list of needs and goals in order to enter it into the template. The next features that I want to show you are the default data. And I'm just going to use the MA45 non-housing community development assets screen for that purpose because we have some of our new economic development data on this screen, so it'll just be illustrative. Throughout the plan, though, the data tables are populated wherever possible with ACS, CHAS, in this case right here, LED, which is longitudinal employer dynamic data. Any of the data that's available to HUD is pre-populated, and as I mentioned before, that's based on service areas. So in this screen, this is an economic development screen, which speaks to CDBG, so it's populated based on the non-entitlement service area. Whereas earlier screens in the needs assessment that deal with housing would be populated based on the entire state area. But even though we've provided all this data for you, if you feel you have some sort of better data source some survey you've done in the state, or something that is more current than what we've provided to you, you can always change any of the data using this alternate data button. Right now, all of these fields are read-only in the table, but once you click alternate data and add an alternate data source, they'll open up and you can change any or all of them. You don't have to, it won't wipe away the data, but you can change it or edit it. So just quickly to show you, when I click alternate data, I'm taken to this screen that shows some of the alternate data sources I've already entered. If I wanted to use one of those, I would just click select in the box and then click select again in the button to add it to the screen. But to show you how to add new alternate data sources, we have two types. We have survey data or administrative data. So you'll have to classify your data in one of those categories. And when you click on that, either of those buttons, you'll be taken to a page that asks you to name and describe your data set so that HUD can validate the data. So it's just background data or background information about your data set, such as who collects the data, how often is it collected, what is your survey methodology, that sort of thing. There's a couple of narrative questions. And then if you were to enter this information and save and return it, the screen, it would appear as another row on this table. For our purposes right now, I'm just going to add this unemployment survey. Click select, and you'll see that now it appears next to the alternate data button. If I were going to say change some of the information for one of these sectors, because my survey was about one of these sectors, I would want to make sure, no matter what I change, that I note what's changed and how it's changed in this note section, because all of these tables in the ConPlan template in IDIS can be pulled by the public using CPD Maps reports. So when they look at the plan during your public participation process, they're going to wonder why the numbers look different if they go and pull their own report. So it's important to just note how and why you've changed any of the data. One of the other things that I want to note while we're on this screen is that the occupations by sector table, there's actually a known error with this. I've entered this information. Right now we aren't able to populate this table. So what I would suggest as an interim solution, and what I've done here, is pulled a report from CPD Maps based on the entire state service area. And you could do this for any of the tables if you're interested in using the entire state area instead of just the CDBG service area. I noted the alternate data source as being ACS from CPD Maps, and then noted that these numbers are based on the entire state. Next on the screen, I want to talk about how you customize a plan. You can see as I've been scrolling up and down this motif right here of hyperlinks. These are what we call insertion points, and you'll see them throughout the plan. Up above here, I've already added a couple insertion points. You can see that once you've added them, on the screen, they appear as rows in a table that can be viewed. We're just going to open one quickly. So you can see here, here's the text that I entered, and then I labeled it. It has a sequence. You can always change the sequence if you want it to appear differently in your plan, in a different order. In the printed Word version of the plan, the insertion won't appear as a table. It will appear as the actual insertion. So for example, this image, which is a chart that I inserted, would just appear below the, below the text box above it and, above the next data table. I've added a map, but I also want to show you how to do this. So we're going to click Add GIS Map and go through those steps. Clicking on that link is going to take you to CPD Maps. And it's going to take you directly to the grantee area based on the screen that you came from. So because we came from an economic development screen and that relates to the CDBG service area, we're taken to the Pennsylvania non-entitlement CDBG area. From here, all you have to do is add whatever map layers you want to show, And I'm going to go over this in the demonstration of CPD Maps, how to add map layers, how to create a map. But you would add whatever map layers here you wanted to add. When you had the map looking the way you wanted it to look, you press on this print widget. And when that opens up, there's a button that says Export to IDIS. You can rename the map if you want. And when you're ready, you hit Export to IDIS, and the system will let you know when it's been successfully exported. Now that tab won't close. You have to go back to IDIS. And in order to see that insertion, you want to save the screen. Now as the screen loads, I can scroll down and see that my test map is an additional insertion. I want to point out that there are some known errors with the adding GIS data. This is adding data from CPD Maps. Currently, the GIS data import does not allow users to pull data at a higher level than census tracts and limits users to 100 census tracts, which is obviously a problem for states. But coming in November, this GIS data import will have all the flexibility of the reports wizard in CPD Maps. That means that you'll be able to pull in a data table, for example, this data table, for one section of your state by county. You could pull a custom report of 3 counties. Or you could pull it for the whole state and compare the CDBG service area to the whole state. So that will be fixed. Currently, our interim solution is to pull the report as you normally would in CPD Maps, which opens in an Excel file, and then take whatever you want from that Excel file and save it as a JPEG and use this Add JPEG function. You can also create charts in that Excel file, so that would be helpful in doing something like what I had done here with the JPEG insertion that's a chart. So moving on, we're going to go back to the main menu and discuss that structure of the strategic plan and annual action plan. And I'll do that by going through a couple of the screens in each of those sections. Starting with the strategic plan, the first screen that is one of the ones that is connected to other screens and actually provides data for a future screen is this geographic priorities screen. Now, of course, adding target areas is optional for all grantees, not just state grantees. It's optional for entitlement grantees, but it's not optional to talk about how you're describing the basis for allocating your investments geographically within the state. So you can do that. You can come to this screen, use it just to enter this narrative, or you can add target areas to help you describe how you're allotting funding throughout the state. You'll see as we come to this screen that any target areas that you've previously entered anywhere in IDIS will show up here on a list. Here I've already included several of them. If we wanted to include this Elm Street neighborhood, I would click Include and then hit Save. What that is doing is taking the target area that's already saved in IDIS and actually adding it to the plan. Once I've created the list of target areas that I want to include in the plan, you want to go in and add background information to justify the inclusion of that target area. You do that by hitting Edit next to the target area. That will pull up a screen with several questions about the characteristics of that target area that would justify its inclusion in the plan. So here we have the general information that was already in IDIS, the name, the type of area, the percent LMAD. And then below, several narrative questions, and I've entered some text in these text boxes. Identifying the boundaries of the target area. It doesn't have to be neighborhood boundaries. It could be, here I've said it's the entire city. It could be, you know, the northwest region, corner of the state. It could be a certain, you know, 2 counties. Whatever it is, you can describe it here. You then describe the market characteristics in the neighborhood that kind of lead you to believe that there's a need for a certain type of program, and so on. And you want to do that for each one of your target areas that you're including in the plan. You also have the option to add additional target areas that weren't already on this list, and you do that right below the list by adding any of these areas. Clicking these buttons will allow you to add an area, name it, provide this general information. But once you do that, you'll also want to go through that original process of including it in the plan and adding the background information. And like I said, while these target areas or adding any of these target areas is not required, it can be helpful in indicating how your funding is being distributed geographically throughout the state, because these target areas will show up on menus in the priority needs and goal screen. So you can assign a goal to be addressing a particular target area which has a specific need, and in that way you're pointing to how you're allocating your funding geographically without explaining it in a lengthy narrative. So next we'll move on to that priority needs screen, and you'll be able to see how those target areas are listed there to be added or to each priority. Again, I've set up several priorities for the demonstration, but we'll look at how to add another. When you get to the priority screen, you see that you start off by naming your priority, anything that is meaningful to you, and then categorizing it as high or low. You can further describe what that priority means in your state. But then you also need to select which populations are addressed by that priority. And this is something that is called out by the regulations, and it's also sort of a standard way for HUD to categorize all of these unique priorities set up by different types of grantees. If you don't see a population in this list that would be addressed by your priority, there's always this other user-defined category at the bottom that you can enter whatever it is, whatever would be meaningful, and then you would check that box. So we'll just say extremely low and low-income people. And then further down the screen, we have the list of target areas. And maybe this priority is a priority in a certain area of the state, or maybe it's not. But if it is, this is an easy way to just check that it is without going on and on explaining it. Here you can see that we have goals associated. These are goals that you're going to name on a later screen. And the reason they'll show up here and the priorities will show up on the goals screen. They're here because I've already set up information. But if I were to go and add goal number 4, that would show up here after the goal was added. Or the priority will show up on the goal screen, and you can kind of match them up there. Once you match them up on one screen, they'll be matched up on the other screen. So I'll say this is going to address goal 3. And then, of course, the regulations require a description of the basis for relative priority. And that's the information required to set up a priority. And your priority is obviously added to the list. So returning to the main menu, I want to move on to the anticipated resource screen. This is the other screen that will also contribute data towards the goal screen. So I want to take a look at it. It's also a good example about how this template is cutting down on the repetition and not asking you to enter information multiple times. You'll see that in this screen, you're asked for your year 1 funding amount, program income, prior year resources, but also the expected amount of funding you think you'll have available for the remainder of the ConPlan. So this screen actually covers the requirement for both the Consolidated Plan and the first year annual action plan. You'll see when we get further down to the action plan menu that there's a screen called AP15, Expected Resources, in the action plan, and that screen is actually exactly the same as this screen. It's a read-only copy, because you've already entered your first year funding that you expect to have available. The reason we have it twice is because when you go to print a Word document, you may want to print the whole thing. You may want to print just the action plan. So you wouldn't want that resources section missing from the action plan. So we have it a second time in the menu, but it's read-only. So obviously we have the 4 formula block grants that Pennsylvania receives in our example, and I've entered the amounts. But also, this screen allows you to enter other public or private leveraged resources. Here I've entered 2. Just to show you how to add another, you click Add over here on the right. And you can pick a resource type from this drop-down menu. We have just a list of some general resources that many grantees use in combination with the ConPlan grants, but of course there's other, and you can specify any type of resource you have, whether or not you have funding available in the first year, or if you have an expected amount over the whole planning period. Identify whether it's public or private, federal, state, local. And then this list at the end of this screen, uses of funds, is not meant to be eligible uses specifically, more so general uses of the funds. And these are based on the uses of the ConPlan grant funds. So by selecting some of these uses, you're showing in a tabular format how your leveraged resources may align with some of your ConPlan resources without having to, again, describe in a more lengthy narrative how these resources can be used together. And then if these categories don't fit your purposes, there's an other box which you can define. When you finish this resources screen, all of these resources, the Consolidated Plan grants and the leveraged resources, will show up as menus on your goals screen. And also, again, in your action plan and your method of distribution. The final area that I want to cover in the strategic plan part of this demo is the goal screen. This is going to look a lot like the setup for the priority needs. Obviously, I've set up a couple. I'll go in and just edit one of them to show you the various fields. Much like the priority needs, you describe a goal in a way that is meaningful to you. And then there's categories based on the regulations. So you have to categorize it by the type of goal it is. Here we have a start year and an end year because you may not be starting it in the first year. It may be a goal that you expect to address in year 3. We have these outcome and objective categories that we've used in the past. I think grantees are pretty familiar with them, so they still exist here on the goal screen. Then again, we have the geographic areas. So if this goal is going to be targeted in a certain area, it may also be city or statewide, or may also, be in a certain target area. Each year, you can identify if you're addressing that goal where it's being addressed. So maybe in year 2, this goal is being addressed statewide, but later in your planning period, you're really going to be focusing in more on a certain area of the state that has a specific need. So there's some flexibility there. And then as I mentioned, the priority needs show up here as well. And you can check which one this goal is addressing. We have our 4th priority need that we just set up here. One difference in the goal screen is that now we're going to talk about the funding allocated across goals. You can see that the leveraged resources I included are here on the list as well. And then down on the bottom here are the goal outcome indicators. And state grantees are required to use these goal outcome indicators just on these goals screen in the strategic plan to set general targets over the 5-year period. We do understand that states allocate funds differently than entitlements, So it's difficult to project maybe a specific number of units or specific number of beneficiaries. So we're only requiring that these targets be set at the consolidated plan level, not each year at the annual action plan level. It's important, though, to set these numeric targets so that there is something to, a numeric basis used for assessing progress in the CAPR. But we'll get to how states can set targets in the annual action plan next, which is less specific. I don't want to take up too much more time. In the annual action plan, as I mentioned, the expected resources screen is going to be a duplicate of the anticipated resources screen in the strategic plan. We'll just look at the annual goals and objectives to see how the goals in the one-year plan, here we've set up a couple, are actually a subset of your 5-year goals. So they're always going to match up, but you don't have to address all of them in 1 year. So here, we had already added goal 1 and goal 2. Goal 3 is another option to add. And then much of this information is going to be, once I add a goal, is going to be filled in for you. We already decided what the category that goal is, when it starts and ends. Now in this year, as I mentioned, you may address a specific target area, whereas you might not next year, so this is flexible for each year. And then you have a specific amount of funding that year. And down here, again, you're going to see the goal outcome indicators, but as I mentioned, not required for states at the annual action plan level. You may, however, have a program that you're administering directly. Some states administer home directly, so you might want to put a specific number of units, but not required. So we'll move on to see how states set their one-year goals. First, I just want to mention there is a project screen, also not required of states, but available because some states may administer certain programs directly and may know about certain projects at the time of the annual action plan. Our last screen we'll look at before the method of distribution is this allocation priorities screen. And this is how states are going to set their one-year targets. Rather than by a specific number of units, it's going to be by percentage of the grant that you expect to put towards a goal in that year. So it's a lot more general than the goal outcome indicators. And then the last screen I want to look at before we move on to the mapping is the method of distribution. The screen is fairly straightforward. It's a number of narrative questions. You'll mark which funding sources, and this again is a menu based on the amount of, or based on the funding sources you set up in your anticipated resources screen. You'll name your program. You may do a different method of distribution for each funding source. You may integrate several funding sources into one program, so you can indicate that here. You can enter information based on these questions that come out of the regulations about your method of distribution and your criteria for awarding funding. But this is probably going to be summary information because these text boxes have a 4,000 character limit. We do have some insertion points at the bottom here where you can add additional text boxes, but this is below all of the questions. So we allow for you to add attachments on the administration screen on 8025 to add any more detailed information about your method of distribution. Like I said, if you have more than one method of distribution, you can add another. So here you would just click Add Method, and the same set of questions is going to appear directly below that set you just answered. Again, name it, funding source, and answer the questions that apply. And with that, we're going to move back to the PowerPoint presentation. So next I want to talk about the data and the mapping tool. This is just a list of requirements and the process we use to identify the data that could be used in the template and in the mapping tool. If there's data that you would like to see in the mapping tool that we don't currently have, we would love to hear your suggestions for enhancements, but try to keep in mind that these requirements may be the reason that we haven't previously included that data. So usefulness, availability for all grantees and at the census tract level, regularly updated, and at little or no cost so that we're not subject to budgetary restrictions. I do want to note that while we are attempting to make sure that all the data in the mapping tool is available nationally for all grantees and at the census tract level, there are some exceptions to this. While larger geographies generally can be built from census tract level data, which is the reason that we start with the census tract, there is some data that's important to state grantees, and we're willing to accommodate those needs if they can be identified. So one exception that you'll see in the tool is the EPA Clean Water Needs Survey data, which is actually at the state level only, but was specifically requested by state grantees. So if there are other data sources like that that would be useful for states, we're happy to consider them. And then you can see below we had a working group of various offices at HUD, subject matter experts, other agencies that helped us identify these data sources. And actually that last one about grantee suggestions indicates that we had done a presentation on a very, very early version of the tool over a year ago for several states, and that's when they actually suggested the EPA Clean Water Needs Survey data. We asked how this tool can be more useful to states and what type of data would be useful, and that was something that was indicated at that time. This table just summarizes how we've expanded the data, how HUD is providing more data beyond affordable housing data. That dark blue band across the top is the CHAS crosstabs, which you're all probably familiar with, and this is what we've been providing up until this point. So this is very powerful data. It gets down to the household level about renters who are extremely low income, who have a specific housing problem such as cost burden. That's very powerful, but it's limited to housing needs. So now we're expanding to include generally much more census products, such as the American Community Survey, that get into population demographics and descriptions of the housing itself, the stock, the cost of it, the condition of it, size, types of housing, and also economic development data like workforce characteristics, travel time to work, unemployment. And on that note, we have the longitudinal employer household dynamic survey, which is a census product, and this actually gets into the changes in jobs and workforce over time and in specific sectors. And then beyond the census products, we're really trying to provide a lot more HUD program data where it's available, where it's been provided to HUD, we want to be able to provide it back to you. So we have the picture of public housing, which is the characteristics of public housing residents, the continuum point-in-time counts, also project locations such as CDBG, home, HUD multifamily. We actually have low-income tax credits, public housing, developments, voucher, Section 8 voucher concentration, and then we have fixed transit stops and FEMA floodplains. So as you can see, it's just a lot more data, and to make that data easier to understand and manage, we built this user-friendly mapping tool, which is CPD Maps. We call it our data-driven decision-making tool. And it is a really user-friendly interface. While we worked with our folks in policy development and research and programmers to develop it, Meg and I had very little GIS experience, so we designed this tool for people like us, figuring that if we could understand it, then you all could as well, and it could be useful. This tool is publicly available without special software or access restrictions, and it's fed by a central database at HUD. So when the data is updated, it will be updated for everyone. There's several features within the tool that I'll get into when we start the demonstration that show how you can pull maps and reports, compare different geographies, and how it's organized to really meet the assessment analysis requirements in the Consolidated Plan. So with that, I just want to jump right into the mapping tool demo. Now here in CPD Maps, the first screen that you're going to see is this Guide Me wizard. And this is really to walk new users through creating their first map. But also it's very important to choose a grantee or a place to go to so that the mapping tool knows what area you want to look at. That's going to enable other features in the mapping tool that I'll show you as we progress through the different widgets. To search for a state grantee, you want to turn off the non-entitlement units of general local government and then search in the drop-down by state. I'm going to use Pennsylvania because that was my grantee in the ConPlan. And when you pick Pennsylvania and hit next, you're going to get a list of all the grantees in the state because I had all the grantee boxes checked. So I'm going to scroll down and choose the Pennsylvania grantee area. And just note, sometimes it's going to be the state name, and sometimes it's going to say something like PA non-entitlement. So just look around the list for the grantee you're choosing. I'm going to go with CDBG. This next screen just limits the data layers within this wizard, as I said, for a user who's making their first map. But I'm going to skip it because I'm actually going to go straight to the map and choose my map layers from the data there. And there's all the map layers, all the data is always available when you get to the map. And this next one is important for states because right now all the thematic layers will draw by census tract. But you can't see census tract generally when you're zoomed out to the extent of the state. So we can change it here to draw by county. And when we turn on any of the map layers that draw by county, they'll automatically do it. We won't have to go into each map layer and individually change it to county. And from there, I'm just going to finish and go straight to the map. Right, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties, which probably has to do with the bandwidth of the webinar. So I'm going to reload the mapping tool if necessary. If you get a box like this, light colored box, it's kind of frozen, it means you should probably start over. Quickly through those steps that I already identified. We can move on to the next widget. Okay, and so this is the screen that should show up. You'll see the outline of the grantee area you chose, and you'll see this little box here, which is called the grantee summary, and has this past year's grant amounts for all the grants that this grantee receives, which is all of them for the state. If you want to see a little more information, you can click the More button, pull in the right corner to expand it, and then you can see the grant amounts for the past 5 years and some simple housing and demographic numbers. One thing to note right now, we'll be hiding this. The tool is choosing fair market rent for the state based on a centroid in the center of the state, so which obviously should not be State College. This table should not appear here. So we'll be updating that in November with our next development release. We'll also be allowing you to print this grantee summary in November. Next, I want to take a look at the map layers that are available for mapping. As I mentioned, we have some data from DOT. We have the State Clean Water Needs Survey, which draws by state. We have floodplains. We have these activity and property locations, CDBG, home, also public housing, multifamily. These you're going to need to zoom in more to see. So what you want to do is examine some of the thematic layers on the map, which are generally found in this Community Indicators menu. Identify an area of need, and then zoom in and overlay the investments. I'm going to take a look at the vacancy rate. And again, this may take a minute to draw because of the bandwidth with being live on the webinar right now. But generally, it's pretty quick. And while I'm waiting, I want to mention that we have this economic development data, which is new in the tool. Includes unemployment and the change in jobs. These change variables, they cannot be mapped right now at the county level, only at the tract level. But we have unemployment, commute time, and that's some of the new data that we're able to provide. Also, down here under the boundaries, we have grantee boundaries, which will show all the areas within your state that are different types of CDBG grantees, so urban counties versus the non-entitlement area versus the entitlement. And in the other, we have some other types of grantee areas, as well as low-mod census tracts for when you're zoomed in to see tracts. We also have these difficult-to-develop areas and qualified census tracts. So we have the vacancy rate now mapped for Pennsylvania, but it looks like everything is kind of falling in a similar bucket. So what I want to do is show you how to change the settings so that you can see more variation across the state. What you do is click this little globe, which looks like a world with a gear on it, and that's the settings. It allows you to map by different areas. Right now we're by county, but we could have changed it back to census tract. And right now it shows us that it's dividing up the data based on natural breaks in the data. But I find that actually the quantiles is really useful. It's a different formula for breaking up the data. And we can see when I close the map selection tool that now we're seeing a lot more variation. We can see where the need is greater in certain areas. Vacancy rate is a lot higher here in the northwest area, and then also in this northeastern corner of the CDBG non-entitlement area. From there, we might want to zoom into one of those areas and put on the point layers. But in the interest of time, because we are running out of time, I want to quickly show you how you can pull a report for this area to get all the background data. Not only can you pull a report for this area, you can pull it for tracts, place, counties. I can do a group of counties. You can also pull this report for units of general local government. So if you're trying to decide how to allocate funds among units of general local government, you can pull data for those places. Also, they can pull their own data, even though they're not a direct grantee, when they're applying to states for funding. So I'm going to pull data by county, use this rectangle tool to draw an area. I want to pick these counties, and it's going to pick up every county that I touch. And then it lists the counties. By clicking next, I can actually pick a reference area. So I can have two types of data on my report. And I'm going to go with the state. So I'm going to compare it not to the grantee area, but to the full state. Next is a list of all the types of data tables available in the report. And you'll get used to this as you play around with the Excel output. One thing to note is that the special needs data is only available by grantee area. So for example, the homelessness, only available if you choose a report by continuum of care. HOPWA, only available if you choose a report by HOPWA grantee area. You click Finish, you want to have your pop-up blocker off. And an Excel report will open. I happen to have this open also already. And you can see the tabs across the bottom align with those options that we had in the reporting tool. We have our target and our reference area. And many times the target and reference are going to be next to each other in a table. Sometimes they're going to be stacked if the table is too long. One thing I want to point out is these NAs, it's not an error. Actually, we cannot add up averages. Based on the way that census provides data, we cannot add up averages. So when we create a custom area such as groups of counties, we cannot create averages for that. So we have some of the data where we have denominators, and in other cases we have some NAs. But we have a lot of data in here, so it's still very rich for that custom area. This is demographic data. We have housing needs, which is a lot of that CHAS data, and this is an example of the stacked target and reference data. The first table, housing problems by renter by income level. The second one, same table but for reference. So always target first and then reference. This report also will show you the geographies you chose for each of the target and the reference so you could recreate it, and the map you were looking at so you can get an idea of why you thought this specific group of counties was important to look at in a report. Maybe you went through that report and you found that this group of counties had a really high poverty rate and a really high instance of severe cost burden, and you're wondering if other parts of the state are experiencing those problems as well, and then you'll kind of know where you might want to target a certain program. One way to figure that out is to use this map query tool, which is this globe with a magnifying glass. This will allow you to search for similar places within the state that have similar coexisting conditions. So I want to search only within the state because I don't really care about counties that are on the other side of the country. So I picked grantee jurisdiction. And again, I want to search by county because I'm interested more in general areas of the state. From here, I can pick two variables to query on. And as I mentioned, I'm interested, I think, based on my report, the data that I saw on a high poverty rate, and also a high rate of severe cost burden. Now you have to hit control when you're selecting more than one variable here, and you can select up to 3. This next screen populates, you can see that we have the maximum and minimum for all the counties in Pennsylvania, which are 55 counties. So there's a county with an 18% poverty rate and one with only 5.49%. Here we can adjust the criteria to find areas that have high poverty rate, we'll say above 12%, and also a high instance of severe cost burden, above 10 maybe. And then as you change those, you'll see that the number of counties results goes down. So now we have down to 3 counties. We have the highest poverty, counties with highest poverty rate, and then also a high instance of severe cost burden. And you should know for all of these wizards, for all the data we're just discussing in the tool, there's a glossary for the different data layers, for all the wizards, for also just the technical terms that we're using on this ConPlan webpage, on the CPD Maps subpage of the ConPlan webpage. And so here when we select Finish, we see what our criteria were, and we see that we have 3 counties. We can order those counties lowest to highest. Also, the map brought back where the counties were. You can see how you can identify areas of the state that are experiencing certain conditions that might make you want to target your funds towards them. And I want to say that also you can use the Guide Me Wizard to select an UGLUG, unit of general local government. You can also pull a report by unit of general local government, but I'm going to skip that right now because we're already over, and just go back to the presentation quickly and pull up some key resources for you. First, you should know that coming in November, we have a development update. We'll be making data corrections to plans in IDIS where data is missing or incorrect. We'll also be implementing that more flexible data import from CPD Maps into IDIS. And then for CPD Maps, we're going to be implementing a number of updates, but one of them that's specific to states is the ability to filter activity data to isolate state-funded projects. So right now, when you turn on CDBG projects, all the points come on. It'll change so you can filter between entitlement grantee and state, not by a specific type of, or specific grantee, so not by Pennsylvania, but just by state. So I could at least see where within the state, within entitlements communities, the state has invested. This is Meg Barclay. Just another couple of improvements that we've actually also, in response to feedback from state users, we will also have the ability, we're also going to change the zoom level at which you can see those point layers, so you'll be able to zoom out further and still see the points, so they'll be a little more useful to you, especially once you're able to filter for states. And then we also had, just going back a little bit to the mapping demo, a question about whether the tool maps areas of low income or minority concentration. Yes, you can map that race data. There is race data under the demographics tab in the map selection tool, and also income level data. And you can map the race data by county. And so how you define concentration will be up to you, but you can see how when from the demonstration, you could change those breaks to correspond to your definition of concentration as well. Just a couple of other answers to questions that will come in during the webinar. And here we'll just finish with our submission requirement timeline, and then we have a couple more questions we'll answer for anyone that's still waiting on the webinar. So just to be clear, the use of the Consolidated Plan template in IDIS is mandatory for all grantees for ConPlan submitted on or after November 15th, 2012. We have a CPD notice describing that on the ConPlan website. So if you have an action plan due, you have in the next year, you're not required to use it for your action plan until you have your next ConPlan due. However, we have an optional standalone action plan that grantees can submit in IDIS if they want to start submitting in IDIS before their next ConPlan is due. This will require grantees to enter a very limited amount of information on their approved ConPlan just to connect goals from the 5-year planning period to the 1 year for CAPER purposes or PER purposes. And doing this will allow you then to, at the end of your program year, enter your CAPER in IDIS, which will create some efficiencies because your accomplishments will be pulled in and matched up to your goals. But you should not be entering any approved action plans in the system. You have to start with fresh with a new action plan. And then again, just to be clear, the CAPER cannot be used until at least an action plan has been entered in the system, submitted and approved in the system. This screen has our key resources in case you want to click on any of the ConPlan web pages. Again, we have a desk guide for both the template in IDIS and for CPD Maps, and also a troubleshooting guide currently on the ConPlan and IDIS web page of the ConPlan website. This will be updated once we have all those new improvements being made in November. And the OneCPD Resource Exchange is where you can find recordings and slides for past webinars. This webinar will eventually go up there. And coming next week, actually, we have a virtual help desk called Ask a Question. It's going to be launched beginning next week, and so we'll be updating all of our information to indicate that you should be sending questions there. And we just have a couple of quick questions we want to answer before signing off for those of you who are still with us. We had a question about whether you can add PHAs to the standalone action plan template, and the purpose for adding the PHAs in the ConPlan template is so that the template can be pre-populated with the data. And since there's no PHA data coming in because there's no market analysis and there's no needs assessment in an annual action plan, you don't need to add PHAs for the standalone annual action plan. If you're interested in looking at any of the data or checking out the ConPlan template, you can always go in and add a plan to practice because the field office will never see the plan until you've submitted it. So if you're just interested in the type of public housing data that's going to be available to you once you've added PHAs, you can go ahead and add a plan. Just call it test plan or something like that so that it's clear that that no one should be using it. But again, it will only be visible to you as the grantee. And we also had a question about technical assistance and if technical assistance was going to be available for these plans. The answer to that, we are ramping up our technical assistance effort, but if you have questions, obviously you can definitely go in there and familiarize yourself with the template and the tools long before you actually either decide to go ahead and use them or are required to use them. But if you have questions, as Caitlin mentioned, the virtual help desk is coming soon. So you should send those questions there. We're going to have much more people power to respond to those questions much more quickly coming the end of this week, early part of next week. And if you feel that you need remote or direct technical assistance to work one-on-one through your issues, you should request it through your field offices. That's right. And so, based on available resources, we hope to be able to provide some help with that. But we think that when you get in and start using the tools, that you'll find that they're very user-friendly and that hopefully the help desk, which will have a faster response rate, will really be able to answer most of your issues. I just wanted to move to a question kind of more from the beginning of our webinar about whether or not you can pull the home data, get the home data in your template for the non-entitlement area as opposed to the whole state. You can do that. You would basically want to pull all of the tables, and I think Caitlin mentioned this, all of the tables that are in the ConPlan template are also in those CPD Maps reports. What you would need to do is pull a CPD Maps report for the home non-entitlement area and populate it that way. That's sort of a judgment call but on the part of each state, and we understand that the whole state is technically states can spend their home money across the whole state, including within entitlement areas, and so we started with the most broad definition of where the eligible areas were. But if you have specific areas based on how you're designing your program and you want to change the data to match that, you can do that using the data from CPD Maps. We also have a question sort of similar about whether or not you can limit the PHA data to the PHAs that you work with, which are only non-entitlements. Yes, you could do that. Obviously, you have the whole list available to you, so you can pull the data based on the needs that you want to address, which are the PHAs that you work with. So that would be, you just have to know what the names of those PHAs are so that you can add them in, so that data is aggregated based on the PHAs you work with. I think that we had a question about how to know what is mandatory versus optional on the screens. Right now we have regulatory references that correspond to what's on the screen. You should refer to that, and there should be also some references in the manual as well. And the user manual has both state and entitlement and consortia regulatory references in it. So always go back to the regs to be sure whether or not you need to include. The system won't stop you from submitting if any information is missing. We are going to, given the need to just make sure that this is a really big application and it can be very squirrely, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't keeping anyone from being able to submit. As the system matures, we will build in edits that would be a lot more robust about required versus not required, but for now, let the regulations be your guide. And I think that's all the questions. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we will turn it back over to our moderator.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Caitlin and Meg. And thanks everyone for taking the time to attend today's webinar and for the good questions. Please do complete the survey so we can get your thoughts for future webinars. And also, as mentioned by Caitlin, the recording of this presentation will be available on the OneCPD Resource Exchange website next week. Again, when you go there, just click on Learning Center, then ConPlan Training. We hope you'll join us in October for the next webinar. Please watch the Training and TA page on the Consolidated Plan website for more information. And once again, on behalf of the Office of Community Planning and Development, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.